episode 35 of the Life in Norway show. Yes, we're back after a somewhat unintended 6-month break. Truth be told, I was getting a little tired of producing the show, feeling it wasn't really helpful anymore, but just lately I've received a whole bunch of emails from people all over the world asking when it will return. I can also see from the stats that the show is getting more downloads than ever before, even without any new episodes. So thanks to everyone who got in touch. Your wishes have been met. Today I'm speaking with Richard Wood. He is the British ambassador to Norway since 2018. He's the second ambassador, actually, that I've had the pleasure of interviewing on the show, following my chat with Artur Wilczynski, who was then Canadian ambassador. That was all the way back in episode 6, I think it was. Today, Brexit is obviously on the agenda, in particular how it will impact the 15,000 people like me, Brits, living in Norway. But it's far from the only thing we talk about. We also chat about the role of an ambassador in 2020, his first impressions of life in Oslo, his travels around Norway, and a lot more. So this is absolutely a show for everyone. You can find out more information on today's show on the show notes page. Simply head on over to lifeinnorway.net/podcast and look for episode 35. Happy listening. I'd like to welcome Richard Wood, the British ambassador to Norway, to the latest episode of the Life in Norway show. Richard, I've made a cup of tea and I'm looking forward to our chat. Welcome to the show.
Thank you very much. Looking forward to it.
Now, first things first, how does one become the British ambassador to Norway? What's your story?
Well, I've been a diplomat actually for 30 years, so I guess I've kind of worked my way up. But we have a career that takes us around the world doing different stuff in different places, and hopefully then you gather enough experience in enough different areas that you can run an embassy.
So how does it work? Did you choose Norway or did Norway choose you?
I definitely chose Norway, but you have to apply for a job that is coming up in the period that you're due to move. Luckily for me, Norway was in it. And I knew it would be a great place to work because of all the fantastic links that the UK and Norway have, and that's exactly how it's proved to be.
Did you have any experience of Norway? Had you visited before you took the post?
Do you know, I'd only ever been once on a long weekend to Ålesund, of all places, when they started up direct flights from Gatwick. So a long weekend was about it. But I was head of the department in London that was in charge of relations with Norway. So I had some experience of working with issues that we deal with Norway on. So, that led me to think it would be a great job. And so I definitely wanted to apply for it.
How long have you been in Norway now?
A year and a half.
A year and a half.
Yeah.
So you've had time to get to know certainly Oslo and a few other parts of the country fairly well, and get to know Norwegians fairly well. So what were your first impressions of Norway and life here in Norway?
I think, interestingly, a lot of British people in the UK just assume that, Norwegians, Scandinavians in general, they're a bit like us. That must be pretty much the same. And so I think the first thing that struck me was that there are quite interesting cultural differences. Getting around the country is just not what you're used to with the short distances in the UK. And of course, I come from East Anglia, from Norfolk, which is, I think, about the flattest part of the UK. So the mountains and the scenery were pretty breathtaking to me, which I think a lot of Norwegians almost take for granted. But I think it was superficial things, but on the one hand, but also a sense that there is a different way of doing business here and a different system and business concentrated in different areas. So the differences really start to come out slowly after a while.
And how about Oslo? It's your home. You must spend a fair bit of time in the city, even though you're traveling around Norway a lot. How is life in Oslo?
Life in Oslo is unexpectedly good for a capital city, right? In London, you have to get on a train to go and see a tree. And here you've got Nordmarka, Østmarka, right on the doorstep. And, we're lucky enough to have a house overlooking the fjord. So, it's very comfortable. I think there are other perhaps more scenic places in Norway, city-wise. So I miss those kind of wooden house centres of Stavanger or Kristiansand or Tromsø. We don't really have that in Oslo. There's a lot of kind of modern buildings. So I really enjoy getting out and about, however comfortable Oslo is to live in, enjoy getting out and about and seeing other parts of the country.
Yeah. So your job as the ambassador, the British ambassador to Norway, I'm really intrigued to hear about the roles and responsibilities that you have, because I think for most people, the idea of an ambassador is it's pretty black box. We don't really know what ambassadors do. We don't know the role. The embassies are fairly... There's a distance, I think, between the average person and what goes on in an embassy. Even for those of us that actually live in Norway, we might not really understand your role on a day-to-day basis. So can you just tell us a little bit about the role of the embassy in general and also you as an ambassador?
Yeah, it's a little bit of a shame that it is so unknown. I often introduce myself to people as the ambassador, and slightly blank look comes over their face, right. They wonder what they should say or talk about. And that's actually the reason why we do so much on social media, is to demystify it and show that actually the government and UK in general is so engaged in Norway in so many different areas, and to give people a little taste of that on my personal Instagram and our embassy Instagram and Facebook and Twitter. So I hope people will have a look at that. But it's quite hard to describe in the sense that no 2 days are the same. So one day I might be talking to big companies about export opportunities or investment in the UK. The next day I'm talking energy policy or giving a speech at a business forum. The next day we may have, as we had in Molde last year, a crisis on a liner and have to help out British citizens who are in trouble. I travel up to the north and talk to the military. So it's really anything that comes under the headline of UK-Norway relations. And that isn't just governments talking to governments, it's business talking to business. And I hope a lot of people talking to people from institutions, educational links, football, shopping, all culture, all the kind of stuff that constitutes a relationship between two countries. So it's about guiding that, looking for opportunities, and trying to make a future for the relationship, which is really solid. Yes, but I hope that was a bit of a taste.
Absolutely, that's very helpful. Now, one thing we haven't mentioned yet is the B word, and we will come on to that. But sort of leading into Brexit, could you talk a little bit about the importance of the relationship between Norway and the UK and the kind of things that relationship consists of? We spoke about energy, for example, before we started the call. Any other areas like that are of particular importance between the two countries?
Yeah, so I mean, Norway's economy traditionally was built in the past on three things, essentially. Maritime, fish, and oil and gas, right? And they are still really important to the Norwegian economy and really important to the UK as well. So Norway provides 40% of all of the UK's energy already through oil and gas exports, and increasingly through renewable sources such as offshore wind parks. Provides an awful lot of the fish that we eat in our fish and chips, and UK is the country that Norwegian maritime fleet has most port calls in. So there is really kind of deep-seated relationships in all of Norway's traditional industries. And what I'm trying to do is really also help establish links in newer industries. So we're doing a lot on technology and innovation, encouraging British and Norwegian startups and innovators to come together, which grows through the system, and they end up hopefully collaborating on really important industrial projects. We're also trying to do a lot more on things like health, advanced healthcare and healthy aging. So it's really, really varied. And that's just when I'm looking at the Norwegian policy sector and economic sector. So there's far more stuff. Foreign affairs, we're trying to push a common values agenda very often on things like climate, human rights, gender equality. We're also really close allies in NATO. So I could go on and on and on about how important the links are, and they genuinely are based around us being both North Sea neighbours economically and geographically, and our kind of common values system. So it's really, really deep and broad.
Interesting. Now, Brexit. Can't avoid talking about it any longer. Now, you say you moved to Oslo in 2018, so that would have been after the vote. So you took this role when we knew that the negotiations had begun and so on and so on. So you must have spent a lot of time talking to people here in Norway about Brexit.
Well, I did. I did talk to people a lot about Brexit, but I don't think it preoccupied people's minds here as much as it's often assumed. So what businessmen are interested in is, yes, how do they navigate what was short-term uncertainty leading up to Brexit? And they will obviously be thinking now about the kind of deal that comes out of it. But, businesses are very long-term focused. So what they really want is to plan where we'll be in 10 years' time and a sensible course how to get there. Similarly, with the government, they are convinced that, we're not sailing away into the mid-Atlantic, and therefore we are going to continue being important North Sea neighbours. And so they are focused on talking to us about how we get a secure environment in the North Atlantic, how we protect against terrorism and cybercrime and disinformation from Russia. Lots and lots of people in Norway, almost everybody, is focused actually on the long term of the relationship. And so I haven't had to focus as much on the short term that led up to Brexit as I think most people would assume.
Mm. Now, I can't claim to speak on behalf of the, 10, 15,000, something like that, Brits who are living in Norway. I'm sure you'd know the number better than me, but something like 10,000. We, plus the million or so Brits living overseas, we certainly, I know from a lot of people that have told me, we feel like the forgotten people over these last 3 years, because our future has quite simply been uncertain, and to live with this uncertain environment for so long has been extremely stressful for all of us. Now, Brexit has now happened. At the time of recording, Britain has left the EU. We've entered this transition period. Could you explain to any Brits that might be listening, also any Norwegians living in Britain, and perhaps any Brits who are considering or wishing to move to Norway in the future, where do we stand at the moment in terms of rights on things like, well, first of all, immigration and the right to live in Norway, but also things like healthcare and pensions and so on? Have things been settled, or are they still under discussion?
Yes, absolutely, they've been settled. It's 15,000, by the way, in Norway. And we have reached out to as many people as we can to try and guide people through the process, because I absolutely realise it's been very unsettling for people not understanding what was happening during the process and what that might mean for their personal circumstances. I absolutely understand that. And therefore, we've done events around the country and had 1,200 people that we've reached around the country who have managed to come personally to events. And we've tried to keep people updated through that kind of personal meeting and ability to ask us questions, and also through Facebook Live and through our social media and a Living in Norway website, which people should definitely check out, because you can sign up for updates. So we have really tried to spread the message and help people feel reassured, because actually the situation was clear before Brexit and is even clearer now, because the agreement has been signed and implemented with Norway, so that Brits in Norway legally resident before the 31st of December at the end of this year, any Brit who is legally resident before that time will be able to maintain their right to live and work in Norway and to many other services, just as if we had remained a member of the EU. So that's a really important thing to be clear about. Up until 31st of December this year, nothing changes. And after the 1st of January 2021, Brits who were legally resident here before that will maintain their rights. That's all agreed. Now, there are still one or two things to be settled. For example, Norway has told us they will introduce a special permit or card or something that will identify Brits with those rights, i.e. who get pre-Brexit rights, and those who arrive afterwards, who will apply under the normal immigration system. We don't know what that card will be or what the application process will be. We're still talking to the Norwegians about that, but we will keep people updated. So that will be, in a sense, the final piece of the jigsaw. The rights are guaranteed. It's just a piece of paper or a card required to be able to demonstrate that is still coming. So that's the situation. We don't know what the situation is on other parts of the future relationship, such as trade and fishing rights and all of those things, but people shouldn't mistake that for the situation on citizens being unclear, which it isn't. We have an agreement, it's all agreed, it's all in place, been signed, and those rights are maintained. So I could go into details about healthcare and pensions and all of those things, but basically the thing to remember is that all the rights that you have now pretty much are maintained. But please, if people are in any doubt about their personal circumstances, they should check living in Norway, check the agreement, and make sure that they understand where they are. But all of those basic rights are in place: living, working, healthcare, and all of those basic types of things that people need in their daily lives.
Okay, that was very clear. Thank you very much. I do have just a couple follow-up questions, though. The ID cards, I'd actually heard about this for the first time just a couple of weeks ago. My partner is from outside the EU, and he has a permanent resident card. So will the card I get be the same as that, or is Norway working to introduce something just for British people who were here prior to Brexit?
I don't think they have finally decided on that yet. It could be that it is similar to a card they already have, but some of the rights may be different, so they are considering whether they need a separate thing which identifies Brits with those certain rights. So we will keep people updated on what the final decision is from UDI.
It's likely to work in the same way in that when travelling, I would need that ID card along with my passport in order to come into the country.
Absolutely. You will need to, I presume, at other Schengen airports or airports around the world, demonstrate that you have the right to live in Norway without entering as on a tourist visa. And that card will be designed to do just that.
Okay.
But also services like healthcare and what have you.
Sure. And one other follow-up then for people that, well, as you've said, people can move to Norway throughout this year, throughout 2020, under the old arrangements. Now, for a Brit who is looking to move in 2021 or afterwards, they are essentially using the same system as anyone from outside the EU, someone from the US, from Brazil, or wherever. Is that right?
Absolutely. That's our understanding, that Brits will be treated in the same way as any other non-EEA national. So Americans, obviously, a good analogy, yes.
Okay. Now, I imagine that on your travels around Norway, as you said, you've put on these information events in various different cities. You've had a lot of questions from British people, if not so much from the Norwegians, about Brexit. Brexit aside, what are the kind of questions you get from British people living here?
I think British people, by and large, are incredibly well integrated into Norway. Many people have been here a long time, married Norwegians and the like, and set down roots here. So I don't think that they think every day about contacting the British Embassy to ask us particular questions. We have had some concern from people who are more newly arrived and have had problems around their paperwork around Brexit, as we talked about, and we've been able to offer them some advice. But we don't get a lot of questions about difficulties of daily life in Norway. As I said, I genuinely think Brits here are by and large very well integrated.
Excellent. Richard, we are almost out of time, but before I let you leave, I will ask you the 3 questions that I ask every guest on the Life in Norway show. So if I could have some quick answers, please. What's the best thing about living in Norway?
Scenery.
Okay. And what is the most challenging aspect of life here in Norway?
The weather and the dark.
Yeah, I should say we're recording this in early February, and we've had whilst not the worst weather this winter, we've had a lot of dark days as always. So that takes some getting used to. Even I've been here 8 years now, and I still hate the winter. So that's a fair answer.
Summer is almost as bad because I can't sleep when it's light so late. The sun goes. Well, it finally gets dark about 1 a.m. and gets lighter. Starts getting light again about 3. I find that almost worse than the dark.
That's actually a really good point. We've spent several years trying to find a solution to sleeping in the summer. I mean, we've tried eye masks. We have blackout blinds, of course. But the big problem is, and this is something you don't realise until you live in somewhere with the midnight sun, is the birds outside the window at 2 o'clock. They're tweeting just like it's the middle of the day. There's nothing you can do about that. Okay, final question, Richard. Where is your favourite place in Norway? Whether that's a particular city or a secluded spot somewhere on a hiking trail.
I don't want to offend anybody, but I mean, I really love going to Tromsø. I think it is the most spectacular scenery. People in the north are very open and fun. I've always had a great time in Tromsø, and it's the place I'm always most enthusiastic to go back to.
That's excellent. Richard, thanks so much for your time today. Where can people find out more about their rights post-Brexit and other information about the relationship between Britain and Norway?
The best place is on the Living in Norway website, gov.uk Living in Norway. You can Google that and find it. And our Facebook page, British Embassy Oslo, also links to all that information.
And you mentioned that you use social. I think you said Instagram. What's your handle on there for people to see?
I am Richwood FCO on Instagram and Richwood UK on Twitter.
Excellent stuff. Richard, thanks so much for your time today.
Thank you. It's been fun.